Imagine your best friend comes to you and, they're deeply concerned, maybe even crying,
Yeah.
and they're begging you to get professional help because your partner just told them you are completely losing your mind.
Which is terrifying.
Right. They say you've become volatile, abusive, and just um, entirely detached from reality. But the thing is, you aren't losing your mind.
No, not at all.
Your partner is simply pulling the strings of this psychological phenomenon called proxy abuse. I mean, they're dismantling your reality, your reputation, your entire support system, and they are doing it using the tears of a victim.
It's incredibly insidious.
It really is.
Yeah.
Usually when we think about being trapped in something, there's this expectation of visibility.
Mm.
Like structural engineering, you see the steel bars, you hear the lock click, and you know exactly what is keeping you confined.
Right. It's a physical reality.
Exactly. You are either locked in or you are free.
And, we crave that binary. We really do. It's clean. And in a strange way, it is deeply comforting. I mean, we want our threats to be visible.
Yeah, to be easily categorized.
Exactly. To look like the villains in a movie. If someone screams at you and throws a plate across the room, well, you know you're in danger. The threat is totally overt.
But then you step into the world of human behavior, specifically, toxic relationship dynamics, and suddenly those steel bars are completely invisible.
They vanish.
Yeah, we're looking at an emotional landscape that is just incredibly murky. You are trapped, but the front door is wide open, and you can't quite articulate why your legs refuse to carry you through it. So welcome to this deep dive.
Glad to be here.
Today we are speaking directly to you, the listener, because if you have ever felt confused, chronically exhausted, or just entirely off balance in a relationship, whether that's a romantic partner, a family member, or even a colleague, you might be caught in a web you didn't even know was being spun.
That's a great way to put it.
So our mission today is profound. We are going to decode the hidden architecture of emotional manipulation, toxic relationships, and covert narcissism.
And the promise we're making to you today is that by the time we finish this discussion, you will understand the invisible forces that have kept you trapped in these painful, confusing cycles.
Look, it's huge.
It is. And more importantly, we are going to look at the exact clinical protocols for how you actually break free.
Yes.
So we're pulling from a highly curated stack of clinical sources today. We are examining comprehensive clinical literature on post-separation tactics, psychological deep dives into systemic proxy abuse, the exact mechanics of conflict de-escalation, and some really advanced trauma recovery protocols.
Okay, let's unpack this, because looking at this material, these aren't just dry medical readings.
Not at all.
They are essentially clinical maps of human behavior. I mean, they are survival guides for the nervous system.
Yeah, and the goal here isn't just to point fingers and identify, bad behavior. That level of analysis is just too superficial, and ultimately it doesn't really help anyone heal.
Right. It doesn't solve the root issue.
Exactly. We are going to look at the profound neurobiology and the trauma patterns that make these toxic cycles repeat over and over again. We want to understand not just what is happening to you on a random Tuesday night in your living room, but why it's happening on a cellular nervous system level.
I love that.
Okay.
Because to understand the trap, we first have to understand the architect of the trap.
Precisely.
And diving into the clinical data, the most insidious, difficult to spot profile is the covert narcissist. Because, when most of us hear the word narcissist, we picture the grandiose stereotypes.
Oh, absolutely. The loud, arrogant person.
Yeah, the center of attention CEO or the boastful partner who constantly demands applause. But the literature paints a very different, much more dangerous picture of the covert narcissist.
It really does. So in clinical psychology, we look at narcissism on a spectrum, and it generally branches into two main presentations, grandiose and covert. The grandiose narcissist is overt. They demand admiration directly. If they enter a room, they want to own it. But the covert narcissist, which is sometimes referred to in the literature as the vulnerable narcissist, they operate entirely in the shadows.
Wow.
Yeah, they are highly sensitive to perceived slights. They're deeply passive-aggressive, and they present themselves to the world through this permanent lens of self-pity.
See, that is such a jarring contradiction to me. They are a narcissist, meaning they have an inflated sense of self-importance, but they act like a helpless victim.
I know, it sounds counterintuitive, but to understand why it happens, we have to look at the hidden emotional need and the unconscious psychological mechanism that's driving them.
Right.
At their core, both the grandiose and the covert narcissist are built on a highly fragile, shame-based sense of self. It is a psychological void. They both desperately crave what we call narcissistic supply.
Let's define that for the listener, because it's kind of the engine of everything we were about to discuss today.
Absolutely.
So narcissistic supply is essentially validation, attention, emotional reactivity, and control. It is the external fuel they require to regulate their own internal self-esteem, because they are fundamentally incapable of regulating it themselves.
Exactly. Now, the grandiose narcissist extracts that supply by dominating the room. The covert narcissist, however, extracts that exact same supply through the performance of vulnerability.
The performance of vulnerability.
Yes, their unconscious mechanism is to present themselves as chronically misunderstood, perpetually underappreciated, or unfairly treated by the world. I mean, they cast themselves as the ultimate martyr.
Wow.
And what does that do? It triggers your empathy. You lean in to help them, to comfort them, to fix their problems, to validate their worth. And in doing so, you're handing them the absolute, unadulterated narcissistic supply they need to stabilize their fragile ego.
That is terrifying, because they are literally hijacking your best qualities. I mean, they are taking your empathy, your compassion, your willingness to self-reflect, and they're just using them as a fuel source.
Highly parasitic, yeah.
Let's make this concrete. The sources provide this covert narcissist detection checklist to help identify these subtle patterns. But instead of just listing these off like a textbook, let's look at how they actually play out in a real dynamic.
Great idea.
So the core trait that underpins almost everything else on this list is a complete lack of accountability, paired with intense blame shifting.
Yeah, this is a big one. A covert narcissist simply cannot tolerate the shame of being wrong. To admit fault is to experience a total psychological collapse.
Because of that fragile ego we talked about.
Right. So if you confront them about something they did that hurt you, they will never offer a genuine standalone apology. Instead, they utilize a defense mechanism where they twist the narrative to induce guilt in you.
Okay, give me an example of how that sounds.
Sure. Imagine you gently tell your partner, it really hurt me when you ignored me at the party last night. A healthy partner says, I'm so sorry, I didn't realize I was doing that.
Right, they just own it.
Exactly. But a covert narcissist will sigh heavily, look devastated, and say, well, I have been under tremendous stress at work, my mental health is crumbling, and I was actually having a panic attack at that party. But I guess my feelings don't matter. I guess I'm just a terrible partner. You're always attacking me when I'm already down.
Oh, wow. And suddenly, the entire script has been totally flipped. You brought up a valid hurt, and within 30 seconds, you were the one apologizing to them for being insensitive.
Yep, it's pure emotional sleight of hand.
And I imagine that bleeds directly into the most damaging trait on the checklist, which is gaslighting. We hear that word thrown around a lot on social media, but clinically, gaslighting is literal psychological warfare. It is the persistent denial of reality.
It is the systemic dismantling of another person's perception. You remember an event clearly, you know exactly what was said, and they look you dead in the eye with utter conviction and say, that never happened. You're imagining things. Your memory is terrible. You're being way too sensitive.
Which just makes you feel like you're losing your mind.
Completely. And over time, this creates severe cognitive dissonance. The literature uses a really profound term here. Abuse amnesia.
Abuse amnesia.
Yeah, because your reality is constantly being overwritten and denied by the person you trust, your brain just becomes overwhelmed. To maintain a baseline of survival and keep the attachment intact, your brain starts to minimize or literally forget the abusive incidents.
You literally forget them.
Yes. You lose trust in your own mind. You start, recording conversations on your phone just to prove to yourself that you aren't crazy.
That is so dark.
Yeah.
Which leads right into their disguised grandiosity. Because while they're tearing down your reality, they are subtly elevating themselves.
Right. It's not the grandiose, I am a god complex.
No, it's more like, no one appreciates how much I sacrificed for this family.
Yeah.
It's a backdoor to superiority. They were claiming the status of the ultimate martyr. And if you dare to have a bad day, or if you get sick, they will immediately minimize your struggle to refocus the spotlight on their own suffering.
Exactly. Your flu is absolutely nothing compared to their migraine.
Yeah. But the mechanism that locks all of this in place, and I think this is so crucial for the listener to understand, is their hot and cold behavior. Because they aren't abusive 100% of the time, right?
No, not at all. If someone is awful to you every single second of every single day, the human survival instinct naturally kicks in and you just leave.
Right.
To bypass your survival instinct, the covert narcissist gives you flashes of the wonderful, attentive, loving person you thought they were in the very beginning.
Right, the whole love bombing phase.
Exactly. They will be incredibly kind for a few days, and then completely abruptly, they will give you the silent treatment or withdraw emotionally over a perceived slight you didn't even know you committed. This creates a deeply crazy-making cycle.
You know, hearing all this synthesized together, I actually have an analogy.
Let's hear it.
It sounds like a grandiose narcissist robs you at gunpoint.
Right.
Like, it is violent, it is obvious, and you know definitively that you are being robbed. You can call the police and say, that person took my wallet.
Yes. Very overt.
But a covert narcissist convinces you to willingly hand over your wallet, your coat, and your shoes because they are shivering and pretending they're freezing to death. You give it to them because you care.
That is incredibly accurate.
But wait. If they're constantly playing the victim, constantly draining your energy, and constantly shifting the blame, how does the target not eventually just get exhausted and walk away? I mean, why doesn't the victim's logic eventually override the empathy?
Well, this raises an important question, and the answer requires us to step away from behavioral psychology for a second and look deep into neurobiology. We have to talk about intermittent reinforcement.
Intermittent reinforcement.
Uh-huh.
Okay, this is the mechanism that essentially turns a human relationship into an addiction, right?
Mm-hmm.
Explain how this operates in the brain.
So, intermittent reinforcement is recognized in behavioral science as the single most powerful conditioning tool in existence. Think of a slot machine in a casino. If you put a quarter in a slot machine and lost every single time, you would walk away after 2 minutes. And if you won the jackpot every single time, it would lose its thrill and you'd eventually get bored.
Right, it becomes predictable.
Exactly. But a slot machine gives you a win just randomly enough and just unpredictably enough that you keep pulling the lever. You tolerate a massive amount of loss because the brain becomes fixated on the anticipation of the next win.
So the covert narcissist is the slot machine. The abuser occasionally provides this intense validation or, a beautiful weekend where everything feels perfect, and that creates a literal chemical dependency.
Yes. When they withdraw from you, or when they give you the silent treatment, your brain drops into a severe deficit of dopamine and serotonin. Your cortisol spikes. You feel immense anxiety and physical pain. You are in a state of literal neurochemical withdrawal.
Oh, wow.
Then, when they suddenly return to being loving, your brain gets a massive flood of dopamine. The relief is completely euphoric. Your nervous system becomes addicted to this cycle of distress and relief.
So it's not a choice.
No. You aren't staying because you're weak or because you lack boundaries. You are staying because your neurochemistry has been hijacked.
That reframing is so important. It shifts the burden of shame entirely off the victim. You are literally fighting your own biology. But eventually, the pain outweighs the chemical dependency, right?
Often, yes.
The target reaches a breaking point. They realize the jackpot is just never coming again.
Mm-hmm.
So the target tries to walk away, or they try to set a firm boundary. But the clinical data makes it incredibly clear. A covert narcissist doesn't just accept the boundary and let you go.
No, we absolutely do not.
When the target finally tries to sever the connection, it triggers a catastrophic reaction in the abuser.
It is a critical, highly dangerous phase in the cycle of narcissistic abuse. It is a calculated manipulation tactic deployed when a relationship ends or when the abuser simply senses the target slipping out of their control. Clinically, we call this hoovering.
Named after the Hoover vacuum cleaner, obviously, because the entire goal is to forcefully suck you back into the toxic dynamic. But let's look at the psychological driver here. What is actually happening inside the narcissist when you finally say, I'm done?
When a target leaves or asserts independence, the narcissist experiences a catastrophic loss of their narcissistic supply. This loss of external validation and control doesn't just make them sad or lonely in the way a normal person feels after a breakup.
Right.
It fundamentally threatens their inherently fragile ego. It feels like psychological annihilation to them. And to prevent that collapse, they engage in what behavioral scientists call an extinction burst.
An extinction burst. We usually hear that term in toddler psychology or animal training. If a toddler throws a tantrum and usually gets a piece of candy, but today the parent decides to hold a boundary and says no, well, the toddler doesn't calmly walk away and accept it.
Not at all.
The toddler escalates, they scream louder, they throw toys, they drop to the floor. The behavior gets significantly worse before it stops.
It is the exact same behavioral principle, just executed by an adult with highly sophisticated manipulation tools. The narcissist's extinction burst is a desperate, rapidly escalating attempt to restore the status quo and regain absolute control over your emotional state.
And the clinical treatise in our stack breaks this Hoovering extinction burst down into 4 distinct subtypes, which is fascinating because this isn't a one-size-fits-all maneuver. Recognizing the specific flavor of the Hoover is half the battle for the victim.
Yeah, it really is.
So let's dissect these. The first one is the narcissistic Hoover.
The primary driver here is the preservation of their grandiose ego and their self-image. This looks like highly charismatic re-engagement. They will show up with bold, sweeping promises of behavioral change.
Like an overnight epiphany.
Yes, they will say, I finally had a breakthrough. I see exactly what I did wrong. I am going to therapy. I am a completely different person now. They might even manufacture accidental contact, like showing up at your favorite grocery store on a Sunday morning, pretending it is a beautiful cosmic coincidence.
Just to show you how well they're doing.
Exactly, to show how much they've quote-unquote grown.
The classic performative reform.
Yeah.
But then we have the second subtype, which is much darker. The borderline Hoover.
Yeah. This type of hoovering is driven by an intense, terrifying fear of abandonment and severe emotional dysregulation. This Hoover abandons charm entirely and relies heavily on somatic crises and emotional hostage-taking.
So they play the victim even harder.
Oh, massively. They might claim a sudden, severe medical emergency. They'll say, I am in the hospital and you are my emergency contact. They will beg for your help, claiming you are the only person in the entire world who can save them. And most dangerously, this is the subtype where we see explicit or implicit threats of self-harm.
Okay, the sources are unequivocal about this. If an abuser threatens self-harm to coerce you into responding, you do not engage with them directly. You do not drive to their house.
Absolutely not.
You call emergency services for a wellness check. You step entirely out of the dynamic and let trained medical professionals handle the crisis. It removes their manipulative control while ensuring human safety.
That is the only correct response, yes. Because engaging feeds the cycle. Now, the third subtype pivots from desperation to malice. This is the antisocial Hoover.
The antisocial Hoover.
The psychological driver here is domination, coercive control, and retributive punishment. If they realize they cannot suck you back in with charm or with pity, they will use pure fear.
Oh, wow.
This involves direct intimidation, stalking, physical or financial sabotage, aggressive legal threats, and highly dangerous boundary incursions. Their unconscious mechanism here is basically, if I cannot control your love, I will control your fear. Either way, you are focused on me.
That is chilling. And finally, the histrionic Hoover.
This is driven by an urgent need to remain the absolute center of attention, both yours and the public's. This Hoover is deeply theatrical. They will utilize highly visible public performances, they will stage elaborate crises on social media for your entire network to see, or they will engage in sexualized triangulation.
Triangulation meaning they bring a third person into the dynamic to spark jealousy.
Yes, they will very publicly flirt with or quickly start dating someone in your peripheral social circle.
That looks to get to you.
Exactly. They don't actually care about this new person. The entire performance is meticulously engineered just to ensure you hear about it, so you will react emotionally and break no contact.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because logically, if someone is engaging in coercive control, threatening self-harm, or parading a new partner around just to hurt you, your logical brain knows this person is toxic. You should just feel disgusted.
Right, logically.
But the sources highlight a hidden paradox here. What is actually happening inside the victim's nervous system when their phone lights up with a hoovering text message?
This goes right back to the trauma bond and the intermittent reinforcement we discussed earlier. Because your nervous system has been fundamentally rewired by the abuse cycle, when that hoovering attempt occurs, say a text that just says, I miss you, I'm so sorry, your nervous system doesn't react with logic.
Right.
It reacts with a massive, instantaneous surge of dopamine colliding with cortisol and adrenaline.
So it's this physiological cocktail of intense stress, primal fear, and addictive desire.
Yes, it creates an intense internal panic, obsessive thought loops, and severe physical symptoms like chest tightness or nausea. The hidden paradox here is that your brain has been conditioned to seek comfort from the exact person causing the pain.
Wow.
In a healthy scenario, if a dog bites you, you run away from the dog. In a trauma bond, when the dog bites you, you try to pet the dog to calm it down so it won't bite you again. Your nervous system literally craves the relief that responding to the abuser would bring. It is a biological drive overwhelming your prefrontal cortex.
I want to push back on this, though. If my brain is flooding me with dopamine and cortisol when they text me an apology, and my body is screaming at me to reply, how do I know if the apology is actually real?
That's the million-dollar question.
Right, because people do change. People do go to therapy. How do I know if it is genuine remorse or if it is just a manipulative Hoover? Are there objective red flags I can look for when my brain is in that fog?
It is incredibly difficult to parse in the moment, which is exactly why having objective clinical criteria is so crucial. Genuine remorse requires sustained behavioral change over a long period, without demanding immediate forgiveness. But the sources outline specific red flags for a Hoover. First, manufacturing sudden crises.
Okay.
If they only reach out to apologize when the sky is falling or when someone dies, they are manipulating your empathy to bypass your boundaries.
Using tragedy as a Trojan horse.
Exactly. Second, unkept future faking promises. If they suddenly promise to go on that vacation you begged for, or buy the house, or go to couples counseling, things they vehemently denied you for years, that is future faking.
So just dangling the carrot.
Right. They have no intention of following through. They're simply using your deepest unfulfilled desires as bait. And third, any threat of self-harm tied to your response. Genuine remorse respects your boundaries. Hoovering ignores your boundaries to fulfill their needs.
That distinction is so clear. So let's play this out. The target understands this. They recognize the Hoover for what it is. They understand their own neurobiology. They ride out the cortisol spike without replying, and they successfully block the manipulator's phone number.
Good for them.
They hold the boundary. They lock the door. But our sources reveal a terrifying reality. For a pathological manipulator, the need for control doesn't end at a blocked number. When direct access is cut off, the abuse mutates. It goes systemic.
This is often the most devastating and isolating phase for the victim. When the narcissist realizes they can no longer reach you directly, they initiate proxy abuse. In psychological literature, this is commonly referred to as the recruitment of flying monkeys.
A term borrowed from the Wizard of Oz, obviously, referring to the creatures who carried out the Wicked Witch's bidding while she stayed safely in her castle.
Exactly.
This is when the abuser recruits third parties, your mutual friends, your family members, your coworkers, or even legal professionals to gather intelligence, deliver manipulative messages, or systematically destroy your reputation.
It is
essentially a hostile corporate takeover of your social life.
Yeah.
But how do they actually execute this? I mean, how does a covert narcissist convince your own sister or your best friend to turn against you?
It is a masterclass in psychological manipulation, and they use specific, highly effective recruitment tactics. The primary tactic goes right back to their core mechanism, the performance of victimhood. The abuser flips the narrative entirely.
They play the victim again.
Yes. They go to your mutual friends, often breaking down in tears, presenting themselves as heartbroken, profoundly confused, and deeply concerned about your mental health. By feigning vulnerability, they bypass the third party's skepticism and trigger their natural protective instincts.
And the genius of it, the truly insidious part, is that they don't usually tell outright unbelievable lies, right? Because if they just started screaming that you were an alien, no one would believe them. The sources mention a tactic called strategic truth-telling.
Exactly. Outright lies are too easily debunked. Instead, they share technically accurate facts, but they meticulously strip away all the crucial context.
Give me an example of that.
For example, they might tell a mutual friend, "She screamed at me at the top of her lungs and locked me out of the house. I was so scared of her rage." Now, that might be factually true. You did scream, and you did lock the door.
Okay, but what's missing?
What they completely omit is that you screamed and locked the door because they had been relentlessly verbally abusing you for 6 straight hours, cornering you in the kitchen and refusing to let you sleep. By sharing the partial truth, they seem highly credible to the flying monkey.
Wow, that is so manipulative. The sources also mention manufacturing urgency and using the currency of trust to secure these recruits.
Yes, so manufacturing urgency forces the third party to act immediately without analyzing the situation. The abuser will say, "I am so worried about him. I think he is having a manic episode. You have to go to his house and check on him right now."
So it frames the boundary violation as an emergency rescue mission.
Exactly, and the currency of trust involves weaponized flattery. The abuser will pull a proxy aside and say, "You are the only one who truly understands me," or "You have always been the most level-headed, rational person in our family. I need your help."
which plays right into the proxy's ego.
Precisely. They make the recruit feel incredibly special and wise, which binds the recruit's ego to the abuser's agenda.
Okay, I have to stop and ask the question every victim asks.
Yeah.
Are these flying monkeys actively malicious? Do they know they are participating in a coordinated campaign of abuse? Or are they just hopelessly gullible?
Well, what's fascinating here is that the vast majority of flying monkeys actually believe they are doing a good thing. They are unwittingly weaponized by the narcissist's plausible deniability. They truly believe they are mediating a simple miscommunication between two people they care about or checking in on a friend in distress.
They think they're helping.
Yes.
Okay.
There is, of course, a smaller subset of flying monkeys who are toxic themselves, who enjoy the drama and the proximity to power, but most are simply manipulated bystanders.
But the intention of the flying monkey doesn't change the impact on the victim. I mean, whether they mean well or not, they are still delivering the poison.
Exactly. The intention is entirely irrelevant to the damage caused, because the result for the victim is a unique, deeply devastating psychological wound known as betrayal trauma.
Betrayal trauma.
Yes, you expect the abuser to hurt you, you have braced for that. But when your lifelong best friend or your own mother comes to you echoing the abuser's manipulative talking points, telling you that you need to just compromise or stop being so difficult, well, it shatters your reality. It is a profound, suffocating isolation. You realize the contagion of the abuse has spread to your entire support system.
So what is the deeper lesson here? What is the survival protocol when your social network undergoes this hostile takeover?
The clinical advice is harsh, but it is necessary for psychological survival. The deep lesson is that the victim must assume everyone connected to the abuser is a potential flying monkey until proven otherwise.
Okay.
You cannot rely on people's good intentions if their perception has been compromised by the abuser's narrative.
The sources recommend implementing an information diet. What does that actually look like in practice?
An information diet means you radically restrict the flow of personal data. If you run into a mutual friend, you share only surface-level, emotionally neutral facts. Work is fine. The weather has been nice. We are keeping busy.
Keep it boring.
Extremely boring. You do not share your emotional struggles. You do not discuss your legal strategies for the divorce. You do not talk about your dating life. And you absolutely do not vent your grievances about the abuser. You have to operate under the assumption that every single word you say will be reported directly back to the narcissist, twisted out of context, and weaponized against you.
So let's summarize this grim reality for a moment. The manipulator is constantly trying to hoover you back in. Your social circle has been infiltrated and weaponized by flying monkeys. You are dealing with betrayal trauma, and you are just exhausted on a cellular level.
It's a massive cognitive load.
Now, in a perfect world, the advice would be simple. Go strict no contact. Change your phone number, move to a new city, block everyone, and never speak to them again. But we don't live in a perfect world.
Unfortunately not.
What if full no contact is legally or logistically impossible? What if you share 50-50 custody of a child? What if you work in the same department and have to sit in meetings with them? How does a target survive when they are forced by circumstance to interact with their abuser?
When physical no contact is impossible, we turn to Protocol B, the gray rock method.
The gray rock method. It sounds incredibly bleak, almost dystopian, honestly, but the literature frames it as deeply empowering. Walk us through the mechanics of it.
So the goal of the gray rock method is to make yourself as uninteresting, unresponsive, and emotionally flat as a literal gray rock sitting on the ground.
Okay.
When you are forced to interact with the abuser, you offer minimal non-committal responses. Yes, no, okay? Your body language is entirely neutral. Your voice is monotone. You do not make prolonged eye contact. You provide absolutely zero emotional fuel.
Let's look at the unconscious psychological mechanism here. Why does acting like a boring rock actually stop a highly aggressive, sophisticated manipulator?
It relies on the concept of emotional starvation. We have to go back to narcissistic supply. The abuser feeds on your emotional reactivity. They want to see you cry. They want to see you yell. They even want to see you desperately, logically try to defend your character.
Because any reaction is fuel.
Exactly. Any emotional reaction, positive or negative, validates their power and control over you. It proves they exist and that they matter. By providing a completely flat, neutral response, you are cutting off the food supply. You are starving the fire of oxygen. Without the behavioral reinforcement of your emotion, the abuser's manipulation tactics undergo extinction. They get intensely bored, and they are forced to seek their supply elsewhere.
To execute this correctly, the sources highlight the absolute prohibition of something called the JADE protocol. JADE. We need to break this down thoroughly because understanding this is kind of the holy grail of communication with a toxic person.
Oh, absolutely. JADE stands for justify, argue, defend, and explain. Under no circumstances should the target ever JADE their boundaries, their decisions, or their reality to the abuser.
Let's give a real-world example of this to really ground it for the listener. Say you are co-parenting and you are trying to implement Gray Rock. The narcissist sends you a furious paragraph-long text message. You are a terrible parent for not letting me take the kids to the theme park this weekend. You're always trying to control me. You are alienating me from my children, and you are ruining their lives just because you're bitter.
Which is incredibly triggering.
Very. And if you follow human instinct, you will break the JADE rule. Your sense of justice will flare up. You will justify your decision by saying, it's my court-ordered custody weekend. You will argue back, I'm not ruining their lives. You are the one who never shows up. You will defend yourself. I am a great parent. I do everything for them. And you will explain your reasoning. We already had plans to go to my mother's house for a family dinner.
Which is completely natural to want to do.
Mm.
But what happens when you do that, when you offer them those perfectly logical explanations?
I mean, I guess you just give them more material.
You hand them a loaded gun. Because you are operating under the false assumption that they want to understand you, pathological manipulators do not communicate to reach a mutual understanding. They communicate to gather ammunition.
Oh, wow.
If you explain that you are going to your mother's house, they will immediately text your mother and start a fight with her. If you argue that you are a good parent, they will spend the next 3 hours texting you an itemized list of every mistake you've ever made.
So what does a true Gray Rock response to that hostile text actually look like?
A Gray Rock response completely ignores the emotional bait, the accusations, and the character assassination. You do not address their anger at all. You simply reply with the logistical truth. The parenting schedule dictates the children are with me this weekend. I will see you at school drop-off on Monday morning, period.
So what does this all mean? I get the theory. It's like playing dead when a grizzly bear attacks. You give them nothing to maul. But I have a major pushback here, and I think a lot of listeners will feel the exact same way.
Go ahead.
Playing dead goes against every single human instinct we possess.
Okay.
If someone is falsely accusing me of being a terrible parent, my entire body is screaming at me to defend my honor and set the record straight. If I am biting my tongue, suppressing my natural anger, and erasing my own personality day after day, year after year, doesn't that take a massive psychological toll? Aren't I just traumatizing myself by making myself infallible?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, your insight is entirely correct, and the clinical literature heavily validates this concern. Gray rocking is a harm reduction strategy. It is absolutely not meant to be a long-term lifestyle.
It's a shield in a battle, not a home you can live in.
Precisely. It requires an immense amount of cognitive energy to constantly monitor and suppress your own emotional reactions. If you overuse the Gray Rock method for years, the sources warn that it can lead to severe dissociation.
Dissociation.
Yes. You train your brain so thoroughly to detach from your emotions in order to survive the abuser that you lose the ability to connect with your authentic emotions in safe relationships. You become a gray rock everywhere. Furthermore, implementing Gray Rock carries an immediate dangerous risk of escalation.
Escalation, meaning the abuser figures out what you are doing and fights back against the emotional starvation.
Exactly. When you first cut off their emotional supply, they will experience that extinction burst we talked about earlier. They will try harder to provoke a reaction. They will say much crueler things. They will push boundaries harder, desperately attempting to break your neutral facade before they finally accept defeat. Gray Rock is a temporary behavioral shield to help you survive unavoidable contact, but it is not a cure for the underlying trauma you are carrying.
Which brings us to a massive, crucial transition. Because if Gray Rock is just a heavy, exhausting shield you carry to survive, eventually you have to put the shield down. You have to look at the wounds underneath the armor. How does a person actually recover from a prolonged, multi-year campaign of gaslighting, proxy abuse, betrayal trauma, and chemical trauma bonding? You don't just take a bubble bath, practice some mindfulness, and feel better.
Right, it takes a lot more than that.
That leads us into the final phase. Reprocessing reality, focusing on complex PTSD and EMDR therapy.
We have to acknowledge the devastating reality of what prolonged narcissistic abuse does to the physical structure and the operating system of the human brain. The long-term effects frequently culminate in complex post-traumatic stress disorder, or CPTSD.
We need to distinguish this, because when most people think of PTSD, they think of a soldier returning from combat or someone surviving a horrific car crash or a natural disaster. How is CPTSD different?
That is the crucial distinction between single event trauma and relational trauma. Traditional PTSD is often linked to a discrete, terrifying event with a clear beginning, middle, and end.
Like the car crash.
Yes. But narcissistic abuse is entirely different. It is repetitive, it is deeply relational, and it is subtle. It is death by 1,000 psychological paper cuts.
It's not a car crash. It's living in a house where the air is slowly being poisoned over the course of 5 years. You don't realize you are suffocating until you are already on the floor.
Exactly. And because the trauma is relational, inflicted not by a stranger, but by someone who claimed to love you, someone you trusted implicitly, it deeply erodes your reality testing and your core self-concept. Victims of CPTSD from narcissistic abuse don't just have flashbacks to a specific argument.
What do they have instead?
They carry deep, pervasive, shame-based beliefs about their fundamental worth. Their nervous system becomes stuck in a chronic state of hyperarousal and hypervigilance. They believe on a cellular level, I am defective, I am unlovable, or I caused this abuse to happen because I wasn't good enough.
So talk therapy, just sitting on a couch and logically discussing how bad the abuser's behavior was, that isn't going to fix a nervous system stuck in chronic hyperarousal, is it? You can know logically that it wasn't your fault, but your body still feels the shame.
Talk therapy is wonderful for cognitive validation, but for severe relational trauma, we often need to go deeper into the neurobiology of how traumatic memories are stored in the brain. That is where EMDR comes in. It stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing.
Our sources highlight EMDR as a highly effective, evidence-based protocol for this specific type of relational trauma. Can you explain to the listener, without getting bogged down in medical jargon, how this actually works neurobiologically? What is happening in the brain?
When you experience a normal, non-traumatic event, say, eating a really good sandwich, your brain processes it, extracts the useful information, and stores it in your long-term memory. But when you experience a trauma, like severe gaslighting or a terrifying rage incident, the memory doesn't get processed normally. The massive spike in cortisol basically shuts down the brain's processing center. The memory gets locked in the brain's emotional center, the amygdala, in its raw, original form, along with all the original sights, sounds, and intense panic of that exact moment.
So the memory is frozen in time.
Yes. And because it is frozen in the emotional center, years later, a similar tone of voice or a specific phrase can trigger that exact same visceral panic. Your logical brain might know you are safe, but your amygdala thinks the trauma is happening right now.
Oh, that makes so much sense.
So EMDR utilizes bilateral stimulation, usually guiding your eyes to move rapidly from left to right, or using tapping on alternating sides of the body while the client briefly, safely focuses on the traumatic memory.
And what does that physical eye movement actually do to the frozen memory?
It mimics the biological mechanism of REM sleep, rapid eye movement, which is when the brain naturally processes daily experiences. The bilateral stimulation essentially unfreezes the traumatic memory network. It forces the brain's logical processing center, the prefrontal cortex, to finally open up communication with the emotional center. It helps the brain reprocess the traumatic memory clusters, metabolizing the intense emotional charge.
It's not erasing the memory, though. It's not Men in Black.
No, the memory remains, but the physical panic attached to it is neutralized. You can remember the abuse, but your heart rate doesn't spike. The nervous system finally realizes that is in the past, it is over, I am safe now.
Okay, but I have a major question about the strategy here. Therapy usually focuses on changing our internal behavior.
Usually, yes.
But if the narcissist is the one doing the abusing, if they are the ones constantly hoovering and sending flying monkeys and trying to destroy my reputation, how does reprocessing my childhood memories or my trauma actually protect me from their active abuse?
That is the brilliance of trauma processing in this specific context, and it brings everything we've discussed full circle. Remember the golden rule. Narcissists feed off of your emotional reactions. They exploit your unhealed wounds.
Okay.
If they know you carry deep, unresolved shame about not being a perfect mother, they will weaponize that exact insecurity. They will press that specific button to extract a reaction from you.
Oh, I see where this is going.
By resolving the trauma through EMDR, you neutralize the shame. You heal the wound at the root. When the manipulator tries to press that button again, the button simply doesn't work anymore. There is no emotional charge. There is no fear.
That is amazing.
You diminish the emotional impact of their tactics to zero. The manipulator loses their power entirely because you no longer possess the unhealed vulnerabilities they used to exploit. You reclaim your sense of self, and their manipulation just bounces off you. They become nothing more than a noisy, irrelevant nuisance.
That is incredible. It's like they have spent years studying how to pick the lock on your front door, but through healing, you have completely changed the shape of the door. Their keys don't work anymore.
You become fundamentally inaccessible to their specific brand of emotional warfare. You aren't just surviving them with gray rock, you have transcended their reach entirely.
This has been an incredibly heavy, profound journey today. We have covered an immense amount of ground. We decoded the passive-aggressive masking of covert narcissism. We mapped out the violent neurochemical cycle of hoovering and the extinction
Oh,
burst.
we covered a lot, yes.
We exposed the deep betrayal of flying monkeys and proxy abuse. We discussed the exhausting but necessary shield of the gray rock method, and finally, the deep neurological healing of CPTSD through EMDR. I want to speak directly to you, the listener, right now. If you recognize yourself, your exhaustion, or your relationships in this deep dive, I want you to hear this clearly. You are not broken, and you are absolutely not crazy.
That is the most important clinical and human takeaway we can offer. The confusion you feel, the anxiety, the desperate, unexplainable desire to text them back even when you know they are toxic, that is not a character flaw. It is not a weakness.
It's biology.
Exactly. Your nervous system simply adapted to survive prolonged, invisible psychological danger. Your brain did exactly what it was biologically designed to do to keep you alive in a hostile environment.
But before we sign off, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. Something that builds implicitly on all the clinical data and the neurobiology we just walked through. Think about the traits that made you a target for a covert narcissist in the first place. Think about your high empathy, your willingness to self-reflect and admit when you are wrong, your deep fundamental desire to understand and comfort other human beings. The manipulator looked at those traits and saw them as weaknesses to exploit. They saw your beautiful empathy as a natural resource to be mined until you are empty.
Which is tragic.
It is. But what if those exact same traits are actually your greatest superpower? The profound empathy that kept you trapped in the trauma bond, desperately trying to heal someone who was actively hurting you, is the exact same biological and emotional tool that, once turned inward towards yourself, will guarantee your ultimate healing and escape. They didn't target you because you were weak. They targeted you because you possessed a light, a capacity for genuine connection, and an emotional depth that they could never, ever generate themselves.
And once you realize that, once you turn that empathy inward, the invisible steel bars of that trap finally disappear.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Stay safe, trust your reality, and take care of yourselves.